My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of how, at my own wedding, I realized that the people who were supposed to protect me could also be the ones who wounded me the deepest. It happened during the reception. The music was soft, the lights were warm, and guests were smiling, sipping champagne, waiting for the cake to be brought out. I stood near the head table, adjusting the lace on my dress, trying to take a quiet moment to myself. And that's when I heard it. My stepmother, Lynn, leaned in toward my Aunt Marlene, barely bothering to lower her voice, and said, "She's just pretending to be loved." The words hit me like a slap. Every syllable landed with precision, as if she had been saving that line for the perfect moment. I froze. Before I could even process what she meant, my own father, laughed. It wasn't an awkward laugh or a polite chuckle. It was real, full, dismissive. He added, "She's lucky he even showed up." I felt my stomach twist. In that instant, I wasn't the bride anymore. I wasn't their daughter. I was a joke. I stared at the flickering candles, hearing their voices echo in my head. The same man who once carried me on his shoulders and read me bedtime stories had just mocked my marriage in front of dozens of people. And the woman who had stepped into my life after my mother died. She had always worn her contempt like a second skin. But this time, she said it aloud. I stood there in my white dress, holding a glass of champagne, and felt like I had been shoved underwater in a room full of people. No one noticed, no one saw, except for one person. And that person would soon change everything. My mother passed away when I was 13. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of quiet leaving that drains the light from a house little by little, until you realize you've been living in the dark. For a while after she died, it was just me and my dad, Douglas. He wasn't perfect, but he was present. He made grilled cheese on weekends, let me sleep on the couch when the thunder scared me, and kissed my forehead goodnight without fail. But grief is a strange thing. It doesn't always break people open. Sometimes it just hardens them. My dad didn't cry. He didn't talk about her much. Instead, he threw himself into work, into silence, into distance. Then came Lynn. She was polished, charming in public, and always knew the right thing to say to impress a room. She moved in with her daughter, Samantha, barely a year after my mother's funeral. My space, my home, became theirs. At first, I tried to be welcoming. I gave up my room so Samantha could have the one with more sunlight. I helped Lynn unpack. I even called her mom once, just once. She corrected me immediately. "Let's not complicate things, Natalie." I got the message. What followed were years of strategic exclusion. Lynn never insulted me outright. She didn't need to. Her words were wrapped in sugar, but her tone always told the truth. "You're so independent, Natalie," she'd say when Samantha got a new phone and I was told to make mine last. "You're not really the girly type," she'd joke when I wasn't invited to dress shopping with them. My father never defended me. He said I was too sensitive or that I needed to learn how to get along. I tried. I stayed quiet at dinner. I brought home good grades. I gave up asking for things. I learned to disappear. Looking back, I don't think I stopped being his daughter. I just stopped being someone he could see. I became a reminder of a life he lost and didn't want to return to. And so I became a ghost in my own home, always present, never noticed. I used to race down the hallway to hug him when he came home from work. Years later, he barely looked up when I walked into a room. When I graduated high school, there was no party, no congratulations. Just a handshake from my dad and a reminder from Lynn that college would be expensive, so maybe I should look into community options. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Because when you grow up trying to earn love that won't come, you start believing it's your fault for not being enough. And that belief, it settles in deep. I carried that weight into adulthood, into every room, every relationship. Until I met someone who made me feel seen again. I met Tyler James 3 years ago at a volunteer event hosted by a local nonprofit for foster youth. I had signed up to run a writing workshop. He was in charge of setting up the art of fetting up the wort. We barely spoke during the first few hours. I was busy arranging notebooks and pens, and he was untangling a pile of yarn and glue sticks, like it was a bomb. It wasn't until lunch that we crossed paths. He sat across from me, holding a sandwich and a water bottle, and said, "You look like someone who believes in lost causes." I raised an eyebrow. Is that your idea of a pickup line?" He grinned. "No, that's just my way of saying you look like someone who hasn't given up." That was the moment. I didn't know it then, but something shifted. His words weren't smooth. They weren't rehearsed. They were honest, and that honesty stayed with me. Tyler didn't push. He didn't flood my phone with messages or try to impress me with stories about himself. He just showed up. He remembered the names of the kids at the workshop. He stayed late to clean up. And when he finally asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime, he said it like it was okay if I said no. But I didn't say no. Coffee turned into walks. Walks turned into conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. I told him things I hadn't said out loud in years. I told him about my mom. About the way Lynn made me feel small. About how I still flinched when my father called and how I always answered anyway. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. And when he finally spoke, it was never to change who I was, it was to remind me of what I had survived. For the first time, I wasn't performing. I wasn't trying to be the girl who was easy to love or convenient to keep. I was just me. And somehow, that was enough. He didn't make me feel rescued. He made me feel recognized. When he proposed, it wasn't on a mountaintop or in some grand, dramatic gesture. We were in our kitchen, barefoot, eating leftover pasta. He looked at me, reached into the drawer, pulled out a ring, and said, "I want a life with you, even the messy parts." I said yes through tears and laughter. I thought the hardest parts of my story were finally behind me. That I had built something strong enough to stand in front of my past with pride. But I didn't know how deep the roots of shame ran. I didn't know that even real, steady love could still be challenged by the shadows of the people who were supposed to raise me. Not until my wedding day. The morning of our wedding felt like something out of a magazine, golden light pouring through the windows, the scent of fresh flowers filling the air, my bridesmaids flitting around me like butterflies. There was laughter, music, and a buzz of excitement. On the surface, everything was perfect. But under the silk robe and the carefully curled hair, I was holding my breath. It wasn't because I doubted marrying Tyler. He was the only thing I was completely sure of. It was everything else, specifically, my family. I had spent weeks pretending it would be okay. That maybe, just maybe, my father and Lynn would show up differently this time. That they would rise to the moment. That the weight of the day would soften them. I was wrong. Lynn arrived first, dressed in a champagne-colored gown that brushed dangerously close to white. She insisted it was beige. Of course, and made a point to compliment the decorations, like she was inspecting the lobby of a hotel she didn't quite approve of. She sat in my makeup chair before I could and offered a kiss on the cheek, light, cold, performative. Then came her commentary. "Let's hope you don't cry too much during the vows," she said, smiling. "Waterproof mascara can only do so much." No warmth, no sincerity, just another dig, wrapped in lace and delivered with a smile. My father walked in an hour later. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't say I looked beautiful. He didn't even hug me. He looked around, nodded once, and said, "Well, you look ready." That was it. Not radiant, not happy, just ready. It felt like I was being prepped for a meeting, not about to walk down the aisle and start the most meaningful chapter of my life. Still, I smiled. I thanked him. I nodded at Lynn. I laughed at the jokes my bridesmaids made about my shaky hands. I kept the mask on because that's what I had learned to do. Don't ruin the moment. Don't make it awkward. Don't be the problem. But the truth is, I was already unraveling. The girl who used to race down the hallway to hug her dad had vanished, and in her place stood a woman in a white dress trying to pretend that what her family gave her was enough. I looked in the mirror and whispered, "Just get through today." I had no idea how much that day would change me. Despite everything, the ceremony was beautiful. It was held under a canopy of lights in the garden behind the venue. The air smelled like lavender and pine, and the sky was that soft, cloudless kind of blue you only get a few times a year. Tyler stood at the end of the aisle in a navy suit, his hands clasped in front of him, eyes locked on mine like nothing else existed. And for a moment, it felt like nothing else did. I walked down the aisle with a nervous heart but a full one. Each step felt surreal. My dress whispered across the stone path. The guests stood and turned to watch me, some with teary eyes, others with warm smiles. I searched their faces, half hoping to see pride in my father's, some sign of affection in Lynn's. I found none. Still, I kept going, because Tyler was waiting. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves. Mine were honest, a little shaky, and ended with a whispered promise to never stop choosing each other. Tyler's were quiet at first, then suddenly full. His voice cracked as he said, "You're the calm in every storm I didn't know I was weathering." I could barely hold back tears. We laughed when he forgot a line. The guests clapped when we kissed. And as we walked back up the aisle hand in hand, everything felt like a page from a story I had dreamed about since I was a child. For a few precious hours, the weight I carried from my past seemed to loosen. It felt like maybe, just maybe, I had outrun the shadows. That love really could be enough to anchor you when the people who raised you couldn't. There were smiles, hugs, a brief toast from Tyler's brother that made everyone laugh, and I remember thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Maybe I finally made it. But what I didn't realize was that joy doesn't erase old wounds. It just puts a ribbon over them for a little while, and under the laughter and music, I could feel the tension I had grown up with creeping in again. I saw Lynn watching me from the corner of her eye like she was assessing a rival, not a stepdaughter. My dad sat stiffly in his seat, clapping but never quite looking directly at me. And I should have known then. Because sometimes the deepest betrayals don't happen in moments of chaos. They happen when you least expect them, in the middle of something beautiful. It happened during the reception, in one of those rare quiet pockets where the music dims and everyone's just waiting for the cake, the next toast, the next photo. I had stepped behind the head table for a moment, catching my breath. The lights were low, the candles flickering, and guests were scattered across the room in little circles of conversation and laughter. Then I heard her. Lynn's voice, clear, sharp, like she wanted to be heard. She leaned in toward my Aunt Marlene, one of the few relatives from my mother's side who had made the trip, and said, "She's just pretending to be loved. It's all for show." The words didn't echo, they detonated. In a split second, everything around me went muffled, like I'd been shoved underwater in the middle of a crowded room. And then came the laugh. My father's laugh, not a small one, not uncertain. A full, amused snort. "She's lucky he even showed up," he said, shaking his head like I was a punchline. "He'll realize soon enough." I didn't move. I couldn't. My fingers clenched the glass in my hand so tight I heard it crack faintly. My heart started pounding like I'd just run miles. My vision blurred, not from tears but from disbelief. They were sitting just a few feet away, talking about me like I wasn't even real. Like I wasn't standing in a dress I paid for, in a venue I had planned, next to the man I loved. I turned away quickly before they could see my face. I forced a tight smile at the photographer walking by, murmured something about needing air. Outside, the night air hit me like a wave, cool, grounding, and still I couldn't cry. I just stood there staring at the string lights through the window, watching guests clink glasses and laugh, watching Tyler smile with my cousins, totally unaware of what had just happened. And suddenly, I wasn't 13 again. I wasn't that girl trying to hold it all in, trying not to make a scene. I was a grown woman, a bride, a wife. And it still wasn't enough. I thought of all the years I'd spent shrinking to make room for them, all the dinners I stayed silent through, all the moments I pretended not to hear, the digs, the dismissals, the erasure. And for what? So they could sit at my wedding and strip away the one thing that had ever felt real. I wanted to scream, to walk back in and flip their table over. But that wasn't me. That's never been me. Instead, I breathed, slowly, deliberately, and I looked through the window again at Tyler, laughing, present, mine. And for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to go back inside and pretend. Because if there's anything worse than being invisible, it's being seen and dismissed. And I was done letting that happen. When I finally stepped back into the reception hall, I felt different. Maybe it was the air, or maybe it was me. I had wiped under my eyes carefully, no smudged mascara, no signs of the storm I'd just walked through. I smiled at a cousin across the room, nodded at a guest offering a toast. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. As I walked back to the head table, Tyler's eyes found mine instantly. He was in the middle of a conversation with his brother, but he stopped mid-sentence. His brow furrowed. His gaze locked onto mine like he was reading something written in invisible ink across my face. What happened? I could see the question in his eyes. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I sat down, reached for my water, and tried to breathe. Then the MC tapped the microphone. If anyone would like to share a few words for the bride and groom, now's your chance. The usual round of speeches began, sweet, sentimental, lighthearted, a few laughs, a few tears. Tyler's aunt told a story about how he once set up a neighborhood movie night with popcorn and handmade tickets. My best friend Elise talked about the time I helped her move apartments during a blizzard. But I couldn't focus. All I could hear was Lynn's voice. She's just pretending to be loved. And my father's laugh. That awful, gutting laugh. They sat just a few seats away. Composed. Untouched. Lynn had her signature glass of white wine, untouched for once. My father stared into his drink like he was watching the past sink to the bottom of the glass. Then Tyler stood. I grabbed his wrist without thinking. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He leaned down, kissed the top of my head, and said 2 words. "Trust me." He walked to the mic. No toast in hand, no rehearsed speech, just him. The room quieted immediately. You could feel the shift. People expected something romantic, maybe funny. But Tyler wasn't smiling. He looked at the crowd, then at Lynn, then at my father. And then he began. "I wasn't planning to say anything tonight," he said, voice calm but steady. "But something's been weighing on me, and I can't sit with it in silence." I felt my stomach drop. My heart stopped. I wanted to stop him, but I couldn't move. Tyler turned slightly to address the guests. "I didn't fall in love with Natalie because she's perfect. I didn't choose her because she's easy or because our story was simple. I chose her because she's real. She's resilient." His eyes flicked back to them. "She's walked through more pain than most people could handle. And still, she leads with kindness." A hush fell over the room. You could feel it in the stillness. "She doesn't pretend to be loved," he said. "She is loved. By me, fiercely, unquestionably. And if anyone here doesn't see that, then they were never looking." Silence. No clapping, no shifting, just silence. But I felt everything inside me begin to rise. Because in that moment, someone didn't just stand beside me. He stood up for me. Tyler walked back to the table like nothing had happened. No smug grin. No glance over his shoulder. He wasn't looking for approval. He wasn't checking to see if his words had landed. He just sat down beside me, took my hand in his, and didn't let go. And that silence that followed. It was louder than applause. No one moved for a long moment. People just stared at Tyler, at me, at my father and Lynn, but mostly at each other, as if quietly checking the temperature of the room, as if trying to decide whose side they were really on. Lynn's posture didn't change. Her jaw was tight, her smile brittle. She held her glass but didn't take a sip. Her eyes moved like searchlights across the guests, measuring reactions, scanning for loyalty. But she didn't find much. The satisfied smirk she'd worn all evening, gone. My father didn't look at me once. Not during Tyler's speech. Not after. He just stared at the tablecloth like it had become the most important thing in the room. His hands stayed folded. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. And that his silence said more than any apology ever could. But I didn't need his words anymore. For the first time in my life, I didn't need his validation, or Lynn's approval, or the pretend warmth of people who had never truly shown up for me, because someone had. Tyler had. He hadn't just spoken up. He had put his voice, his love, and his presence between me and the people who tried to make me feel small. And he didn't do it to embarrass them. He did it to honor me. The girl who used to tiptoe around her father's moods, who stayed quiet through insults disguised as advice, who believed love had to be earned through silence. She was gone. In her place stood a woman who had been publicly claimed not as someone broken, but as someone worthy. And the room knew it. They didn't cheer. They didn't clap, but they listened. And sometimes that's the greatest kind of justice. Because the truth didn't need to be shouted. It only needed to be said out loud once. And it had been. That night didn't end with fireworks or dramatic exits. There was no confrontation, no shouting match, no grand walkout. Lynn stayed silent. My father never spoke to me. They left before dessert was served. But that didn't matter, because the most important moment had already happened. Tyler didn't just marry me that day, he stood beside the version of me I had fought so hard to become. The version who refused to keep shrinking, who had spent years believing that being quiet would keep the peace, and finally realized it only made the silence louder. And in that moment, with his words echoing through the room and his hand wrapped around mine, something inside me finally settled. I was done chasing approval that was never coming. I was done mistaking survival for love. And I was done pretending that silence was strength. Tyler's love didn't save me. It reminded me that I was never the problem, that who I am, unfiltered, imperfect, fiercely feeling, is enough. And if you've ever been made to feel like you're too much or not enough, I want you to hear this. You don't have to earn love by being small. You don't have to audition for worthiness. You don't have to keep giving chances to people who only show up to take. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's standing in your truth and refusing to let anyone make you doubt it. It's choosing peace over performance. It's building a life so full of real love, the shallow kind can't survive near you. So if this story resonated with you, share it. Leave a comment below, tell your story. And if nothing else, don't forget to like this video, because somewhere out there, someone else needs to hear that they're not alone. Not anymore.